In a small town in Rhode Island, hidden among thick foliage and old dirt trails, there stood a sinister-looking house. It was called Ambrose Manor. The house, large and charming with its Gothic decorations, had a history shrouded in darkness. Not a single town resident was unfamiliar with the legend of Ambrose Manor, a tale of death, madness, and supernatural entities. In the winter of 1969, the Donahue family, consisting of parents Patrick and Alice, and their 4 children, Megan, Sean, Lily, and little Ethan, moved into Ambrose Manor. Patrick, a well-established doctor, had inherited the house from a distant uncle. Despite the rumors swirling about the place, the family decided to move, eager to leave behind the hustle and bustle of city life. Life in the manor seemed peaceful during the first few months. But with the arrival of fall, unsettling events began to occur. Little Ethan started talking to an imaginary friend, Mr. Shadows, as the child called him. Alice, concerned, decided to consult a child psychologist, who reassured her that it was normal for children his age to have imaginary friends. The normality, however, didn't last. Objects disappearing and reappearing in strange places, doors opening and closing on their own, indistinct whispers coming from empty rooms. But the real terror began when the family started seeing apparitions. A man in old-fashioned clothes, with an empty gaze and a tormented expression. Patrick, a man of science, refused to believe what was happening. He decided to consult a psychiatrist, convinced that it was just the stress of the move causing these collective hallucinations. However, the presence continued to manifest, becoming increasingly threatening. One day, during a cold November night, Patrick was awakened by a dull noise coming from downstairs. As he descended the stairs, he saw the shadow of the man standing in the living room. But it was no longer a simple apparition. The man, or what once was a man, spoke to him.
"I am Samuel Ambrose. This is my house."
Patrick, paralyzed with fear, was unable to respond.
"You do not belong here," the apparition continued. "You must leave."
The next day, Patrick told his wife about what had happened. Alice, frightened, insisted on moving. But Patrick was stubborn. He didn't want to leave the house, his inheritance. He decided to seek help from a local priest, hoping that a blessing could rid the house of the entity. But things got worse. The entity seemed angered by the priest's intervention. The apparitions became more frequent and violent. Sean, the eldest son, was found one morning unconscious downstairs, with strangulation marks on his neck. Unable to deny the evidence any longer, Patrick decided to move the family into a town motel, while he stayed behind to try to solve the problem. He decided to contact a pair of famous paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens arrived at Ambrose Manor a few days later. After examining the house and speaking to the family, they concluded that the entity was indeed Samuel Ambrose, the original owner of the house, who had committed suicide in 1897 due to insurmountable debts and severe depression. The Warrens attempted a series of exorcisms to free the house, but the entity resisted. It was powerful and full of anger. During the last attempt, an invisible force attacked them, throwing Ed against a wall and leaving him unconscious. At this point, Patrick realized that he had no other choice. They had to leave the house. The family moved to a new house in Connecticut, while Ambrose Manor remained empty. Despite the terrible experience, the Donahue family managed to rebuild their lives in Connecticut. Patrick opened a new clinic, the children went back to school, and Alice, though shaken by the experience, became an active member of the local community. Meanwhile, back in Rhode Island, Ambrose Manor stood abandoned. News of what had happened to the Donahue family had reached the town, and the fear surrounding the manor grew. Children would dare each other to approach the house, and stories of sightings and strange noises circulated among the townsfolk. No one, however, dared to set foot inside the manor again. The story, however, does not end there. Exactly 1 year after the Donahue family left the house, now essentially a museum, a wealthy stranger expressed interest in purchasing the property. He wanted to meet Patrick in person to ask what really happened in that house. Patrick was honest and advised against the purchase, confirming all the rumors circulating about Ambrose Manor. The wealthy stranger, however, was not intimidated and was determined to buy it. 2 weeks after the purchase, rumors about what was happening inside Ambrose Manor, now owned by the anonymous magnate, became increasingly persistent and worrisome. Townspeople reported hearing strange noises coming from the houses at night, lights turning on and off for no apparent reason, and even dark figures appearing in the windows. Everyone in Charlestown began to wonder why this wealthy stranger, aware of the curse weighing on the property, insisted on staying in the house with his own family. Many speculated that he was attracted by the mystery and dark charm of the house, while others whispered that he himself might be a devotee of the occult, eager to make contact with the spirit world. The tension grew, and the new owner became the topic of every conversation. People began to avoid him, and townspeople didn't hesitate to change their route when they saw him approach. The mysterious buyer, however, seemed not to care. He stayed in the house, along with his family, indifferent to the fear and superstition surrounding Ambrose Manor. Meanwhile, the Donahue family, now settled in a comfortable house in Connecticut, anxiously followed the news concerning their old residence. Even though they had found peace in their new home, they couldn't help but worry about the people who were now living in what had once been their prison. Patrick Donahue, concerned for the safety of the mysterious magnate's family, decided to undertake a journey back to Charlestown and visit the old Ambrose Manor. Perhaps, he thought, he could help the new family better understand what they were dealing with, and how to protect themselves. When Patrick arrived in Charlestown, he found a town gripped by fear. The presence of the mysterious magnate and his family in the cursed Ambrose Manor had awakened old fears and superstitions. Patrick decided to confront the mysterious man and offer his help. He went to Ambrose Manor and was surprised to find the magnate willing to meet him. The man, who introduced himself as Mr. Blackwood, greeted Patrick politely and invited him into the house. Patrick couldn't help but notice that the atmosphere inside the house hadn't changed. There was still a feeling of cold and oppression, but it seemed somehow different. Less violent, but more insidious. At the meeting, the hitherto unknown magnate introduced himself as Mr. Blackwood. No one knows if that's really his last name. He confirmed the rumors circulating in town. Yes, his family had experienced paranormal activity. Yes, they knew about the house's curse. But no, they had no intention of leaving. Mr. Blackwood claimed to have purchased the house for this very reason. He was a paranormal researcher, and the story of Ambrose Manor represented an unprecedented case. Patrick was surprised by this revelation and didn't entirely believe him. After all, why bring his entire family there and let them live in terror? He pretended to understand Mr. Blackwood's intentions. He offered his assistance and his experience, hoping to help protect the family. Mr. Blackwood refused, thus beginning a new phase in the story of Ambrose Manor. Another 2 weeks passed, and the oddities happening inside Ambrose Manor had become nationally interesting news. But one day, the pages of local and national newspapers were filled with a startling piece of news that far surpassed the mystery of the haunted house. Mr. Blackwood, the wealthy stranger and new owner of Ambrose Manor, had been arrested for attempted murder. At the height of a violent domestic argument, Mr. Blackwood had tried to kill his beloved wife. The police intervened promptly and managed to stop him. This terrible act shocked not only the Blackwood family, but the entire New Haven community. After a more in-depth investigation, an even more shocking truth emerged. Mr. Blackwood, it appeared, was a member of a dark cult that worshipped supernatural entities. According to the police, the cult had ordered Blackwood to offer his soul and those of his family to darkness, in an attempt to appease the spirits of Ambrose Manor. All of this, of course, left the citizens dumbfounded. Conspiracy theories began to circulate, making Ambrose Manor even more feared and mysterious. Throughout all of this, the Blackwood family managed to recover from the trauma. After the arrest of Mr. Blackwood, his wife and children moved away from New Haven, trying to leave behind the nightmare they had experienced at Ambrose Manor. They're doing well, according to the latest reports, trying to rebuild their lives away from the shadow of the cult and the curse of the house. Mr. Blackwood, meanwhile, remains in jail, serving his sentence for attempted murder. But the story of Ambrose Manor, with its ghosts and curses, continues to live on. It was the year 2005 in the picturesque town of Ravenswood, nestled amidst the mountains. The tree-lined streets and historic buildings lent an air of tranquility and mystery to the place. However, at the town center stood an ancient mansion that captured everyone's attention, Blackthorn Villa. With its dark walls and dilapidated appearance, the villa seemed like a corner of darkness embedded in the heart of Ravenswood. The story of Blackthorn Villa was shrouded in mystery. It was said to have been built in the 19th century by a family named Caldwell, but the mansion had been abandoned and left to decay for many years. The atmosphere surrounding the villa was filled with legends and tales of spectral events, fueling curiosity and anxiety among the residents. Emma, a young writer fascinated by paranormal stories, was captivated by the sinister reputation of Blackthorn Villa. David, her childhood friend, was a staunch skeptic, tending to rationalize anything related to the supernatural. Sarah, an occult scholar, and Alex, a photography enthusiast, joined them in their decision to explore the villa and uncover its secrets. On an autumn evening, the group gathered before the majestic estate. The full moon shone high in the sky, casting an eerie light on Blackthorn Villa. Emma was excited at the prospect of gathering material for her next novel, while Sarah was determined to find tangible evidence of paranormal activity. David merely tagged along to support his friends, still skeptical about the existence of supernatural phenomena. They crossed the threshold of the villa and were immediately greeted by a dense, charged atmosphere. Their footsteps echoed through the silent hallways, and shadows danced along the faded walls. David made light of the presence of ghosts, attempting to downplay the situation, but a shiver ran down everyone's spine. Equipped with a video camera, Alex began recording the group's exploration, hoping to capture paranormal images. The dim light of his flashlight revealed dusty rooms, abandoned furniture, and broken glass. Sinister creaks of wood and the whistle of wind through open windows seemed to whisper old tales of suffering and damnation. As they ventured deeper into the darkness, Emma paused before a painting hanging on a weathered wall. It was a portrait of a young woman with dark hair and penetrating eyes. It was Isabella Caldwell, the last heir of the family that had inhabited the villa. Stories told of her life being marked by a forbidden love and a tragic fate. As the group gazed at the painting, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, causing the candles on the table to flicker. Then, a faint whisper filled the air, followed by a distant sound of footsteps. The lights began to flicker, and the atmosphere grew even darker. Sarah felt a thrill of excitement and urged the group to gather in the main room for a more thorough investigation. Using electromagnetic field detection equipment, Sarah began searching for paranormal signals. Her devices emitted intermittent sounds, indicating energy fluctuations in the surrounding environment. The signals seemed to concentrate in a particular area of the villa, leading to a secret door that revealed an even older and unknown part of the mansion. Carefully pushing open the heavy door, the group found themselves in a dusty and dim corridor suspended in time. Their footsteps echoed into the void as they cautiously advanced. The walls were covered in cobwebs, and faded paintings depicted figures with sad, vacant expressions. Gradually, they arrived at a secret chamber at the heart of the forgotten maze of rooms. In the center of the room, an ancient wooden table was strewn with objects, a spell book, an ornate dagger, and a mysterious parchment. The atmosphere grew even more intense, as if time had stood still in that forgotten place. The four friends gathered around the table, scrutinizing the objects before them. The spell book seemed like a treasure trove of forbidden knowledge, while the dagger exuded a dark and mysterious aura. The parchment, adorned with arcane symbols, appeared to hold the answers they sought. Sarah, with her interest in the occult, decided to translate the parchment. As she deciphered the ancient runes and incantations, a vision formed in her mind. She saw a ritual that promised to break the curse that had befallen Blackthorn Villa. To free the trapped spirits, they had to perform the ritual during a full moon night, when the veils between the world of the living and the world of the dead thinned. Convinced that this was the necessary step to end the spirit's suffering, the four friends prepared for the night of the ritual. It was a chilly November night, and the moon shone brightly in the starry sky. They gathered in the secret chamber, lighting candles and reciting the ancient words inscribed on the parchment. As the ritual unfolded, the air seemed charged with energy. A vortex of light and shadow enveloped the room, as the walls trembled and the furniture creaked. Then, instantly, everything fell silent. A tranquil stillness settled over Blackthorn Villa, and the four friends looked around. The sense of oppression had lifted, and a feeling of peace filled the air. They felt a gentle breeze, a final farewell from the liberated spirits. As they left Blackthorn Villa, Emma, David, Sarah, and Alex knew they had experienced something extraordinary. They had brought light to the darkness, restoring peace and serenity to the tormented abode. However, even though the curse had been broken, David couldn't completely forget the horror he had experienced. The night still tormented him with frightening nightmares, bringing back the unsettling presence of Blackthorn Villa into his mind. Despite others' rational explanations, David knew the truth was his alone. Only he could feel the weight of his nightmares and the persistent presence of the villa in his life. The tale of Blackthorn Villa lived on in the fabric of the town, becoming a local legend passed down from generation to generation. Some considered it a mere ghost story, while others believed it had a basis in truth. But the truth, only David knew. He carried the secret of his sleepless nights and the nightmares that haunted him. Blackthorn Villa may have been liberated from its curse, but for David, the battle with the darkness was still ongoing. In a remote corner of New England, at the end of a long winding road, stood a menacing-looking house, Greywood Manor. Despite its striking Victorian charm, it had a macabre reputation. Everyone in town knew that something terrible had happened at Greywood Manor, but nobody dared to speak about it aloud. Fate led the Braxton family, Jonathan, his wife Eliza Rainwood, and their 3 children, Charlie, Emily, and little Lucy, to move to Greywood Manor, driven by the necessity of a new life after a financial crisis had ravaged their previous existence in Manhattan. Jonathan and Eliza had a fantastic relationship, a love story lasting over 20 years. Together since their youth at 18 years old, their love story was enviable. With the arrival of the children, they represented the perfect family, happy and full of love. To the eyes of strangers, nobody could be happier than they were. After all, what could shatter this situation of apparent happiness? The first week in the house passed without incidents. Jonathan, a brilliant Wall Street lawyer, became more and more absorbed by his work, becoming gruff and irritable. He was certainly not the loving father his children remembered. As weeks turned into months, Jonathan started acting even stranger. He often woke up in the middle of the night, talking to someone he called the old tenant. But of course, nobody else saw or heard him. Eliza, worried, tried to talk to him. Jonathan insisted everything was fine, but in Eliza's eyes, there was no trace of the husband she once knew. She suspected he might have been possessed by some evil spirit tied to the house. Meanwhile, the children began noticing oddities. Charlie, the oldest, discovered an old diary hidden in the attic. It belonged to a certain Mr. M, the old owner of Greywood Manor, a mysterious and solitary man who legend said had committed heinous misdeeds in the house. Reading the diary revealed disturbing details. Mr. M talked about voices haunting him, dark figures watching him from the house's dim corners. He also described his growing sense of madness and rage. One day, Jonathan disappeared without a trace. The police searched everywhere, but there was no sign of him. Eliza and the children were left alone in the frightening Greywood Manor. The situation worsened when extraordinarily terrifying events started happening. Objects began to move on their own. Sounds of footsteps echoed in empty rooms. Disturbing whispers were heard in the dark. But the most terrifying thing was when Charlie, reading further into the diary, found a disturbing passage: "The old tenant will return to reclaim the house." These words echoed in Charlie's mind. Was it possible that the father had become the old tenant? He tried to confront his mother, but Eliza refused to believe such a terrible hypothesis. Until one night, the front door opened with a sinister creak. Jonathan was back, but he was unrecognizable. His eyes were cold and empty, his face was pale as a corpse. He began to walk towards his family with a terrifying expression. Eliza, Charlie, Emily, and Lucy were paralyzed with fear. Jonathan raised a hand, pointing a finger at them, and with a hoarse voice, whispered,
"The house is mine."
But Eliza, fortified by the love for her children, found the courage to challenge her husband, or whoever was in that body. "No, Jonathan," she said firmly. "This is our house. And we fight for it." The battle for Greywood Manor had just begun. The Braxton family, united as never before, had to face the darkness that had taken possession of their beloved father and husband. But was it truly Jonathan who had returned? Or was it just a shadow of what he once was, possessed by an ancient evil spirit? The Braxton family watched in horror as Jonathan, or whatever remained of him, advanced towards them with a malicious grin. Terror filled their hearts, but they knew they could not let this demon destroy them. Eliza grabbed a bronze candelabrum from a nearby table and hurled it at Jonathan. He hit the wall with a grunt of surprise and stopped for a moment, long enough for Eliza and the children to escape and lock themselves in a room upstairs. Bolted inside, they heard Jonathan banging violently on the door. His voice echoed throughout the house, a disturbing and sinister laugh that chilled the blood in their veins. But in the end, the house returned to a ghostly silence. The next morning, when the sun timidly rose on the horizon, the father was gone. The house was a mess: overturned furniture, broken glass, and red symbols, drawn with chalk, smeared on the walls. The Braxtons called the police, who arrived and documented the surreal scene. The investigations were opened, but Jonathan remained untraceable. After weeks of fruitless searches, the case was closed. Eliza and the children were forced to face a new life without their beloved father and husband. But Eliza, even among her fears, felt that the story was not over. Jonathan's shadow still hovered over Greywood Manor, and she felt she had to go back to find the truth. "I can't let the story end here," she told the children one day. "I need to find out what happened to your father." Although not certain of what she would find, Eliza was determined. She knew it was a risk, that she might reopen old wounds, but she couldn't abandon Jonathan, whatever he had become. So, with the courage of a mother and the heart of a warrior, Eliza decided to face the darkness of Greywood Manor again, to provide answers to unanswered questions and find, if possible, a way to free the tormented soul of her beloved Jonathan.